Hey everybody, today's video is called Those Were the Days, and tonight we continue our pass-through study here in the book of Job, where we're looking at Job remembering better days. And we'll see that Job doesn't change his mind about his standing with God. He doesn't change his mind about his sin, but Job continues to deny that he earned this pain with this inequity. And we'll see he swings back to despair, where he rehearsed life before the events that take place in the heavenly realm in chapters 1 and 2. And from this point through chapter 31, Job addresses God in the form of a case presented like a courtroom. And it's as Job sues for retribution of what he has lost. And the title of today's video might be a phrase that you use yourself. Those were the days. Have you ever said that? Have you ever thought back in time and be like, you know, those were the good old days. Those were the days when life was better. So tonight we continue our pass-through study here in Job 29. Verses 1 through 6 starts out. Job further continued his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and when by his light I walked through darkness, just as I was in the days of my prime, when the friendly counsel of God was over my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were around me, when my steps were bathed with cream, and the rock poured out of rivers of oil for me." So, verse 2, we see it says, "Oh, that I were as in months past." And months of old speaks of Job's prosperity, obviously extended over a considerable period of time. And the author, he's illustrating that a lamp dispels the gloom inside of a tent. And light, it symbolizes God's blessing. And Job recalled the happiness of those were the days when he thought of his family being all there with him. And he recalled the happiness of his family life while his children were still alive and gathered around him. And when you lose a child, life is not the same after you lose them. I've lost one child and a couple miscarriages, but, you know, since losing Aiden at the age of 10, I'm not going to say that life is the same. Life is very odd. It feels very odd. And so Job, he's reflecting here of his family gathered around him. And Job enjoyed an abundant lifestyle. And Job, as he's speaking in the text, he feels abandoned by God. And God will later address his criticisms to prove that he was with him throughout his whole ordeal. And Job had the richest milk and the best olive oil in abundance. So Job had it going quite well before the now. In verse 7 through 17, it says, "And when I went out to the gate by the city, when I took my seat in open square, the young men saw me and hid. The aged arose and stood. The princes refrained from talking and put their hands on their mouth. The voices of nobles were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouth. When the ear heard, then it blessed me. And when the eye saw, then it approved me, because I delivered the poor who cried out, the fatherless, and the one who had no helper. The blessing of a perishing man came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice is like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind, and I was feet to the lame. I was a father to the poor, and I searched out the case that I did not know. I broke the fangs of the wicked and plucked the victim from its teeth." So we did a pretty good amount of verses right there, verse 7 through 17. And in verse 7, it says, "When I went out to the gate by the city, when I took my seat in the open square." And the gate in my seat was a place in society reserved for city leaders. And Job had been one because he was a very wealthy and powerful man at his time. And Job recalls the noble reputation that he had built as practitioner of what now in the New Testament is called pure and undefiled religion. And we're going to speak about that in our wrap-up here. But Job, I think that's the first time I said Job for Job. But Job was also respected because Job was known as a compassionate man who intervened on the behalf of the vulnerable of society. Contrary to the allegations or accusations made by his friend Eliphaz back in chapter 22, verse 6 through 9. And all over the ancient Near Eastern world, a man's virtue was measured by his treatment of the weakest and most vulnerable members of society. And sadly, I would argue that in today's modern day events, that's not the case. Many times people look down on the poor, the vulnerable, having an autistic child, those with autism are looked down upon. And, when we can support those who are less, who are not, like us, who might have different types of disabilities, that is really what good virtue should look like. And if he protected and provided for this group, he was respected as a noble man. And in verse 14, it's the center point of the chapter here. It says, I put on righteousness and it clothed me. My justice is like a robe and a turban. So verse 14 is the center point of this chapter. And it's an emphasis asserting of Job's call for acquittal. And Job went on beyond the standards of the day to care for those who were widows, orphans, the poor, disabled, and the abused. And much oppression occurred in unjust courts, and there Job protected the weak. And in verse 17, says, I broke the fangs of the wicked and plucked the victim from his teeth. So verse 17, those who preyed on others in dire need are compared to wild animals. And Job was liked and approved by those who had heard him. Job would have had a high approval rating among, his community. And Job, he used his wealth and influence to do good, not for his own selfishness, for greed and selfishness. In verse 18 through 20, it says, Then I said, I shall die in my nest and multiply my days as the sand. My root is spread out to the waters, and the dew lies all night on my branch. My glory is fresh within me, and my bow is renewed in my hand. So Job had vigorous health like a widely rooted tree enjoying the fresh dew, and he had expected to live a long life with his nest or his family. And nest, it's a picture of security and the absence of worries. And in Job's former confidence, Job felt that he would die happily and secure after a good long life. And oftentimes that's how we view. We think we're going to live to be old, and we picture what they call the American dream in America, which, is more like, trying to win the lottery to have the American dream today with the policies of politicians. But, Job had an optimistic view that life was going to be good and long. And here we are with Job, who went through all these trials and tribulations and oppressions and, all these different circumstances throughout the book of Job. In verse 21 through 25, to finish the chapter here, it says, Men listened to me and waited, and kept silence for my counsel. After my words they did not speak again, and my speech settled on them as dew. They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouth wide as for the spring rain. If I mocked at them, they did not believe it, and the light of my countenance they did not cast down. I chose the way for them and sat as chief. So I dwelt as a king in the army, as one who comforts mourners. So Job reminded his friends that there had been a day that no one rejected his insights to things. And he was the one that sought for counsel. And Job remembers his former dignity and honor. And in verse 24, it says, if I mocked at them. And the mocked there is likely a reference to saying something humorous or jokingly. It wasn't meant to, hurt people. And Job's word was so respected that they didn't believe in his humor was humor, and they took it seriously. And I wonder if there's anybody else that has that personality where you mock, but the people take you seriously when you're just trying to be humorous. And Job wasn't a king, but some sort of high local official, likely, relevant to a modern-day mayor of a city. And mayors called Hazuno in Job's day performed all the activities that Job claimed in his previous section. And Job is a tremendous example of how a wealthy and powerful person should live his life on earth. If God has blessed you with wealth and power, with character, a highly respected person, you should live your life for others, not in self-indulgence, but in care and concern for the less fortunate. And that is a message that we should all live to, regardless of our financial standings and everything else. We should be able to look out for those who need help. We should be able to look out for those who are in need of, being cared for, kindness. So to wrap up here, we look tonight at Job reflecting the good old days, or the better days, when he was blessed in his relationship with God. In verse 7 through 17, it shows that Job was reflecting how he was blessed in his relationships of life with people. And Job, I would argue, is our example that we need to aim for of pure and undefiled religion. And some people are going to probably be like, but Christianity is not a religion. And I hate that phrase, because the Bible calls our faith a religion. And there's nothing wrong with it being called a religion. Now, there's different, definitions of what religion is today. But, the Bible has it inside that we are a religion. And so James chapter 1 verse 27, it says pure and undefiled faith. No, it says pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father in this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. And I want to clarify with James 1:27, a pure and undefiled religion. That doesn't mean that we work for our salvation. That doesn't mean that we work to be justified with God. Obviously, Jesus paid the price, and our faith is what saves us through Christ's works. However, dead faith is no faith at all. Dead faith is unbiblical. And we see that in James continued later on in James chapter 2 on the next page over here. He says faith without works is dead. So, when God gives us when God makes us a new creation, when we are born again, born from above, we should desire to be the light of the world. We should desire to want to love others, take care of others, and, care for those that others in society might reject. And, James, he taught also that we ought to demonstrate our faith, our pure and undefiled religion in God's sight. And that means to visit orphans, those who are young and can't, take care of themselves. They lost their parents, so we should care for children. And widows, someone that loses their spouse, they were married for 50 years. When you get a snowstorm and it's your neighbor, if you're physically able, you should, at least offer to go help, with snow removal or anything they need. Maybe you could help them out. You're going to the grocery store before a storm hits your area, and, you talk to Martha next door, the old lady, and be like, Martha, can I grab anything at the store for you, so you don't have to go take the bus or, the community van or whatever to go get it yourself. And so Job reflected on the former times, as in verse 18 through 20 gives former sense of security and confidence. In the chapter, it ends on Job's formal authority and leadership in the community. And so that's going to wrap up our study for today. And we will see you next as we're going to look at Job reflect on his current misery. So Job, in our next chapter on, I think, Saturday, he's going to go from reflecting the good old times when life wasn't like this, and he's going to talk about real deep stuff with us about how he currently fails. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening. God bless, and we'll see you Saturday.